everybody, it's January 2013 and that can only mean it's time for the OneLiner.com's 2012 Year in Review podcast Spectacular Asterisk. I am Craig Eastman, with me as always Scott Morris.
Well, how are you doing?
And also with us Drew Tavendale.
Oh.
Drew Tavendale, for those of you watching in black and white, is the ball just behind the pink.
And isn't he always? Fanar.
Okay, so yeah, it's that one where we burn a lot of time talking about shit we saw last year, so let's crack on. Okay, so we have decided that there's no fantastic format this time round. We are just going to have a royal rumble of opinion.
We will talk about films that we liked and films that we didn't like and films that maybe we were disappointed by, as per usual.
And we'll probably take it in turns.
Yes. Who wants to take? Who wants to throw their hat into the arena first? Throw something.
Me.
out.
I've got a hat. I've got a hat to throw.
With multiple takers. Right, Drew. I like your hat.
Thank you.
You may throw your hat first.
I probably shouldn't throw it away if I like it though.
Is it the one?
Like
Sorry, can I see it properly from here? You are sort of 260 miles away as the crow flies. Can you just hold the hat up? Is it the one with the green feather?
It's not. It's the snap brim fedora.
Oh, okay. No, my mistake. That's fine. No, I still like that hat very much. Throw it.
I've thrown it into the ring. So I think the first thing I'd like to mention that was a particular highlight of my year is a French film called Untouchable, which we talked about back in September, which was a tale of a rich white quadriplegic who engaged a black immigrant who's a former convict as his carer. Basically, the story is just of them enriching each other's lives and creating a real friendship.
Oh, I thought it was going to be about them enriching uranium.
I mean, and although it was based on a true story, some of the plot was rather predictable, I'd say. But what made this film really stand out is that it's some of the most engaging on-screen chemistry I've seen in years, probably, and certainly it's the best of this year, although one other film came close to it. It's just an absolute joy to watch. There were some right miserable fuckers in the British press who were saying it was really maudlin and all sorts of things, and they were just wrong. It was delightful, and the chemistry was superb.
Are you being brought to us by the word maudlin this week?
I have used it a number of times tonight. It must have got stuck in my head somewhere.
This week, Drew was brought to you by the letter B. And the word maudlin.
And the colour heliotrope.
Maudlin's the one with 4 strings, yes. But it's a little shorter than a banjo.
Yeah.
It was just an absolute delight to watch. It was really, really funny, and it was really the whole thing tied together by
a rug.
Genuinely superb on-screen chemistry.
Excellent.
Yeah, I must say, it's one that wasn't on my list, but that's because I forgot to put it on my list. If I remembered, it would be on my list.
It's not on my list because I didn't make one, but I did remember it.
Have to echo that. Fantastic ensemble performance. Well, I say ensemble, but the two main characters really tie the film together. Very much enjoyed it. Anyone that says that it's anything less than a delight is frankly dead inside.
There you go. Scott, I see you also have a jaunty hat. Do you want to throw it?
I shall toss it gaily into this ring. Of all the films I've seen this year, now there's always something of a pressure, I think, in these kind of lists of end of the year films to pick something that's like, has a certain human component, but I'm really more interested in something that has a clear idea of what it wants to be and just executes that plan perfectly. And for me, there are very few films I would say that I enjoyed or thought achieved its aims better than Judge Dredd, Dredd 3D. Dredd. I can almost tie this in with the Raid, which maybe I'll circle back to later, but Dredd 3D, in terms of action cinema, is not only the best film I've seen this year, but it's perhaps the best film I've seen in, Lord knows how long. It is a proper action film that has no bones about its restrictive rating, being a 18 here or R in the US. Cool. It just has a tremendous sense of the character that it's trying to do, and all of the kind of baggage that Dredd involves, and trying to condense that down into what is basically an introduction film that is not actually introducing you to Dredd the character. It manages to tell you a Dredd story without giving you any of this kind of backstory kind of arc that, like, say, most first superhero films are saddled with. And it manages to get enough of Dredd's character into the film at the same time as just telling you a really, really great action story as Dredd tries to basically battle his way up this tower full of evildoers with his rookie companion, Judge Anderson. And it is not set in its goals to be the highest thing in cinema, but of all the films I've seen this year, this is the one film that I've seen that I thought, right, it sets out its stall very clearly at the start, and then goes about burning that stall down.
It's very efficient.
If nothing else, it's just a fantastic action film, and if you've any remote interest in action cinema, Dredd 3D, the 3D part is particularly inconsequential, but as a film, the Judge Dredd film of 2012, as opposed to the Judge Dredd film that stars Sylvester Stallone, of which we shall not speak, it is a tremendous action film, and I heartily enjoyed it. I'm going to cheat slightly by throwing The Raid in as an adjunct to this, because in terms of plot, it is so similar you kind of have to mention it at the same kind of time, because both films are basically a lawman attempts to get to the top of a high-rise block full of evil people in the most efficient way possible. Dredd's obviously a bit more gun-based. The Raid, the Indonesian film, although it's directed by a Welshman, is a bit more kung fu-based. Both have kind of roughly similar plots, but both are tremendously good action films, and if you've even the slightest interest in action cinema, both of these films are definitely worth looking out. I recommend both absolutely tremendously, but for me, the actual the stylistic flourishes that Dredd employs makes this something that almost elevates an action film to a kind of work of art, if you'll forgive me being a little bit pretentious, but there's an awful lot to recommend in Dredd 3D. I really liked it, and also The Raid is just a tremendously brutal, enjoyable kung fu watch. So both of these films, if you're even slightly interested in action films, get my highest recommendation.
Yeah, Dredd's a hoot, and as we've mentioned before, has quite an incredible performance from somebody's chin. The chin of Carl Urban does a mighty, mighty fine job in Dredd. It's what you're saying, Scott. He sets out a stall, but then executes it so incredibly well, incredibly efficiently.
Yeah.
It's a very lean film. There's no flab or anything around it, and it's really, really enjoyable.
Yeah, there's lots of films that we're going to talk about that arguably set its sights higher, but they're always set its sights higher and almost get there with a few minor niggles, whereas I thought Dredd was the first film I thought, like, this is a very clear idea of what it wants to be, and is that film perfectly.
Yes.
And for me, that's as close to perfection as you can get. I loved it.
I'm intrigued by Dredd. It's on my catch-up list. It's quite high up there because it was one of those that came and went from the multiplex quite quickly, actually. There wasn't a great deal of fanfare aside from
it did not do anything like as well as it should have done.
TV spots and whatnot in terms of advertising material, yet it's cropped up on quite a few end-of-year lists as, well, not quite a few, but here and there as sort of a bit of a wild card, really, which is interesting to me. And obviously, the Stallone vehicle, Danny Cannon, the film that ruined Danny Cannon's career, was such a huge disappointment that I'd really like to see this done well. And from all that I've heard from reliable sources, people whose opinions I trust, it definitely seems to be worth checking out. So the Raid, we might as well talk about The Raid while we're on the subject. Absolutely bone crunching. I really liked it. Oh Jesus, I really liked The Raid, but I kind of felt actually slightly let down by it, not because it wasn't a great film, but purely because of the expectation that was being built by sort of every opinion I heard aired about the Raid was just this. Oh my goodness, it is a mind-blowing action film. It alters, it's a new paradigm for action films, and it's not. It's not.
No, it isn't.
To call it mind-blowing, as far as if you go in with that kind of expectation, I can't help but feel, that you'll probably be disappointed. At the same time, this was one that I watched on demand to catch up with. I didn't see it in the cinema, and I can't help but feel that probably the shared experience of being in a room with 200 people watching the same film on a 30-foot screen probably would have been a different kettle of chips altogether. So
yeah, I would say the late night showing of The Raid that I went to had a lot of people going, ouch, at a number of points, and that did help it an awful lot.
Definitely.
It is only genre redefining if you haven't seen the genre before about 1985. I think us people around this virtual table of the podcast, will be more than a film with enough brutal Hong Kong films that this is just on a par with them rather than redefining anything. It is just it's harking back to that kind of stuff rather than redefining it. And if you frame it in the terms of it being a redefinition of anything, then I think it would be a disappointment. In terms of action cinema, again, The Raid is up there with the best things I've seen in the past 10, 15 years, because they just don't make this kind of film anymore.
Yeah,
well,
it's not the epoch-defining masterpiece that I was expecting, but
it's a great entry into the existent genre, if you will.
Yeah, if nothing else, it's a stark reminder that there are still places in the world where stuntmen for very little money will actually let you kick them in the head for real and do worse. And there are one or two moments in it, like I sat and watched it with my wife, and I was lapping it up, and I thought she was going to really enjoy it as well, actually. And by the end of the film, I don't want to spoil anything, but by the fluorescent strip light facilitated end of the film, all she had to say was, "This film's really nasty." I'm like, yeah, but in a good way. it's one of those where there was a certain amount of money. Like, there are a couple of shots where you think there's a bit of CG in there, but for the most part, it was people being kicked in the head and thrown out of windows and stuff onto fire escapes, like two floors down.
On the other side, at least to the best of my knowledge, perhaps either of you could correct me, but there wasn't any requirement to have a post-credits scene like in Chocolate, where they come and visit the poor stuntman who broke his neck. Do you remember that, Scott?
Yeah.
Although these are clearly people who are very dismissive of things like, health insurance, and
long life.
Yeah. Method statements and risk assessments. Yeah. No, it was a fantastic piece of filmmaking, and again shows the sort of thing you can achieve on a relatively modest budget. And again, completely unsurprisingly, given the reaction to it, this film, made in Indonesia for pennies, directed by a Welshman who had found it difficult to actually get a film made here in the UK, is now, within about 5 seconds was snapped up by, I can't remember which studio it was, but for the inevitable Hollywood remake, which will no doubt cost 20 to 30 times as much and deliver half as much entertainment. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think more by default, because really I haven't watched as many films this year. Probably, I think The Raid probably would make my top 10 list. But yeah, hugely entertaining. Drew, do you want to throw something else in there?
Okay then. So, a film that perhaps not one of the best films of the year, but certainly one of the more interesting and absolutely one of the most surprising, was Margin Call. Mm-hmm. The story of what was effectively Lehman Brothers Bank and the run-up to the financial meltdown of a few years ago. The two main things about this film is, one is it was superbly acted by a quite astonishingly good ensemble cast, and the other point, the really remarkable, surprising thing about it was this film managed to humanise the people working in Wall Street, these merchant bankers. It humanised them to such a degree that you could actually feel sorry for them.
0 stars.
Which is it was a really interesting film, and it managed to get some of the details of financial markets across without being condescending, completely dumbing it down, but still doing it in a way which was, comprehensible to normal humans who want to work with things that exist, unlike bankers who work with money that's entirely fictional.
Yeah, but tossing coins that aren't coins.
People like Paul Bettany, Zachary Quinto, Kevin Spacey, Jeremy Irons, and Stanley Tucci as well. Truly, truly excellent. Really quite engrossing film, which is weird because the subject matter seems so very dry. And I think it's certainly something worth checking out, because I think film about bankers, the ones that caused the financial crash, that'll be a laugh riot, but it's genuinely very, very rewarding watching.
Cool.
A terrific ensemble of performance, I agree completely. But perhaps that more than anything else made it, there is so much talent behind and in front of the camera that makes it really quite fly. And like you say, tremendously surprising that you would actually feel sympathy for the guys on Wall Street, but I suppose you at some point have to recognise that Wall Street is not just a big block of condensed evil, and there are human characters in there that no doubt were not particularly happy about things that were going down and just had to go with what they needed to do. I thought Margin Call worked tremendously well, and it definitely deserves a place on my list as well.
I can't help but feel it's one of those films where my expectation would be, based on that cast, plot is probably irrelevant. You could probably have a film where those 6 or 7 guys stand around a frying pan discussing the best way to crack an egg open, and it would probably be a really great film.
You don't want to curse it with things like this, but no one would think a film about essentially estate agents would be so good, but you've got Glengarry Glen Ross.
Yes.
This is roughly the same kind of idea with some of the same cast. So,
I was actually going to say that if that my egg frying or egg cracking more my egg cracking film is the new Brokeback Mountain, in that they're not cowboys or shepherds. It's not egg frying, it's egg cracking. I was actually bizarrely enough about to say that if my script were written by David Mamet, that would be ideal. There you go. Excellent news. I want to throw in, did either of you guys see Headhunters?
No.
Headhunters, which I only caught up with recently, and I want to throw that into the melting pot purely because Scandinavian film is the new Korean film at the moment. Ever since, I think, probably Let the Right One In, there's been this sort of peak of interest in Scandinavian film to the point where things that aren't even films are essentially TV movies. Not pointing any fingers at get over a dragon tattoo. Yes, are having cinematic multiplex releases over here. And I was quite sceptical about Headhunters in the first place. I haven't read any of Joe Nesbo's work. The plot seemed a bit far-fetched, but having watched it recently on catch-up, I was going to speak about it in a later podcast, but it's probably better just to mention it here. Okay, probably not one of the 10 best films of the year, but in terms of a nice surprise and something a little culturally different to the norm, then Headhunters is definitely worth a look in. It walks an incredibly fine line between sort of suspense, horrific violence, and pitch black humour. Like I said, I have no idea about the source material. I understand that Joe Nesbo is very well regarded, but on paper, the notion of a guy who maintains his lavish lifestyle and sort of keeps his trophy wife on board by moonlighting as an art thief, as you do, and then stealing a work of art from a guy who turns out to be a psychopath who then sets about trying to kill him. It sounds a bit ludicrous, but it works in ways that I can't imagine, and it has one of the most initially pitiful protagonists who, by the end of the film, by sheer virtue of the hell that he is put through, earns his redemption to the nth degree more than Andy Dufresne ever did in The Shawshank Redemption. And by the end of the film, this sort of pathetic, weedy guy who is living an outright lie becomes such an empathic character that the lead character of Roger Brown, fantastically Scandinavian name there, is played by this guy Axel Hennie, who starts the film by bemoaning his lot as a sort of ugly little short man who can't possibly hope to maintain the lifestyle and relationship that he is by any means other than throwing more money than he has at the problem. Starts the film as quite a sour little character, someone who obviously we have no intention of ever feeling any empathy towards. And by the end of the film, he's dug himself out of the most fantastic hole. And I don't want to say anything. It's one of those films that just constantly blindsides you with stuff from completely out of the left field, but somehow it works. But his as a redemptive piece, it's fantastically well constructed. There are bits of it that probably shouldn't work, but it gets away with sheerly through momentum and sort of humour. And yes, it's well worth a look in. You know, rent it online for a couple of quid at this point, I think, and it is definitely worth watching on a Saturday night. And 2 versions available, as I understand, streaming: the original Swedish with English subtitles, or bizarrely a dubbed version, which we don't see a lot of these days. I can't imagine how the dubbed version would play out. I have no intention of finding out. Stick with the Swedish. Interesting little film, well worth looking into.
Colour me intrigued.
Yes, so there you go. Scott, throw thy hat once again.
I think the next film on my list would probably be Argo, Ben Affleck's latest, which is just a tremendous bit of filmmaking. Almost 3 films in one. We spoke about this not too long ago, so I won't belabor the point, but this tale of a CIA agent trying to extricate some US embassy staff from a war-torn Iran makes for a tremendous bit of cinema. It manages to not only create some real tension as to whether these guys are actually going to make their escape or not, especially if you can't quite remember what happened, because I think it happened before I was born, but also manages to make some really astute observations about the state of Hollywood now by use of a couple of ciphers from people that helped make a fake film as a cover story for the escape of the hostages. Works on a number of levels. It manages to be very funny at the same time as being quite tense. It's a really great balanced bit of filmmaking, and I can't believe that this hasn't been nominated for Best Director. I mean, it's been nominated for Best Films and the Oscars. I can understand that completely, but I think it completely undermines the directorial achievements that Ben Affleck's made. There's an awful lot of great things to recommend in this, and again, definitely worth a look.
Yeah, it's just further proof of what a crock of shite things like the Oscars are, Scott.
Yeah, isn't
when
it
they
just?
don't reward something is absolutely superbly done as this. It's a great film. I don't anything to what you said other than if you haven't seen it, what's wrong with you?
Yes, I have no excuse.
What's wrong with you, Craig?
I know. This is the top of my list of stuff that I would prefer to have seen this year. It very much appealed to me. And as I think I pointed out before, Ben Affleck with his bearded
This year's Ryan Gosling.
floppy hair is this year's Ryan Gosling man crush for me. So how I missed this in the cinema, I don't know, but it is top of my catch-up list, and I promise I will do that and deliver my judgment forthwith. Drew, hat throwing.
It's getting a bit dusty, but it's worth throwing for this film. And I've seen a number of really good films this year. There have been some that have been funny, some really good chemistry, some that have been really thrilling, some like Argo, a mix of all of them. But there's been one film above all that was just fun. It was just outright joyous fun, and that's The Muppets.
Yes.
I think I sat watching that film with a huge grin on my face from beginning to end.
Yeah.
It's The Muppets as good as they ever were. Written by Jason Segel, who's also in it, but knows not to overstep it and be in it too much, that it's The Muppet Show. And it's full of some really, really terrible jokes, which are funny because they're so terrible and deliberately so. Other genuinely funny stuff. Some great jokes about the 80s, back in The Muppets' heyday. It's just, I'm saying it again, but it's pure, pure fun. It's an absolutely joyous film that should just leave you beaming for days afterwards.
Yeah, I'll second that. Again, probably by virtue of the fact that I didn't see that much stuff, it would probably crop into my top 10 by default. But regardless, yes, absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to say classic Muppet stuff, actually, because I think it's probably up there with the best of the Muppet material, to be honest.
Absolutely.
It's more than anyone had any right to hope for. I mean, I'm no great fan of Jason Segel or anything, but you're right. If nothing else, he's proven that he can write some funny shit. He knows when to keep his head down. Anyone else might have been tempted to take a bigger part in this, but he's very much
easy to be very indulgent about that.
Exactly. He very much understands that. He very much understands that he's a supporting character in this.
He knows that he's not the star. He knows that 80s Robot is the star.
Yes, exactly.
I love you, 80s Robot.
But not only that, but he has the not inconsiderably talented Amy Adams on board and has given her the big ask of, listen, I want you on board because you are fantastically talented, but I don't want you to take the spotlight either. And the pair of them show a fantastic amount of good grace in that, and it is to the film's benefit because, yes, the Muppets are the main characters. It is their film. Amy Adams, as fantastic as she is, and Jason Segel, as well as he acquits himself here, very much secondary, and it just gets the tone absolutely right. There are some fantastic beats in there. There's some slapstick stuff. There's some clever little cutaways and things. Easily delivers some of the biggest laughs I've had this year, and I watched it in a sort of very kind of meh mindset, and 90 minutes later I was fantastically glad I'd pressed the rent button.
It can convert even the most cynical people, I think. You would have to be very cold of heart not to love The Muppets.
Yes.
It's just so warm and lovely, and it's so funny. Loved it.
Yay! So I thought you were going to say more than that. Scott, hat throw.
I think the obvious one that hasn't been mentioned so far would be End of Watch. Again, I believe this is probably what Drew was harking back to. It's just a fantastic on-screen chemistry.
That's the one, yep.
Yep, Jake Gyllenhaal and
Michael Pena.
Terrific chemistry. They really feel like a partnership that's been there for years. That comes across without having to belabor any points. And the story itself, arguably less brilliant, but it really serves to drive home the points of just being on the kind of front lines of the kind of domestic front of the war on drugs. And while perhaps parts of the narrative are a bit patchy, they're a bit kind of mini-series-esque, they're kind of small contained bits of film that kind of join together to kind of roughly give you an ending. The narrative may not be the strongest part of End of Watch, but gosh damn, if these performances aren't some of the best I've seen this year, with some really great action sequences as well that you can really feel the impact from, with a good emotional punch. End of Watch is a terrific film, definitely worth looking.
Yeah, I mean, that's been something I've really enjoyed this year. A couple of really strong ensemble performances and a couple of films with really, really good on-screen chemistry. And there have been two films this year that are better than possibly anything I've seen in the last 5 or 6 years, at least that I can bring to mind readily, in terms of the on-screen chemistry, and it's what makes the film. It's just really, really entertaining to watch them together. I think we said before in the podcast that the villains are hugely underwritten. They just seem like stupid GTA characters, but the two leads are fantastic, and it's nice to see David Ayer. If he's not going to move away from doing police stuff to at least explore the side of the good police officers, as opposed to either the criminals or the corrupt ones.
Yeah. On any normal day, this would be my catch-up list, but
The Eye.
excuse me, but I just find Michael Peña's face annoying, so I'm never particularly drawn to films involving him.
The reason
As shallow-
before you
as
were
shallow-
going to avoid it was because of the pickaxe in the eye, or the ice pick in the eye, rather.
I don't know. I thought about that some more, and I thought, oh, come on, get hold of yourself. But then I remembered I'm not a great fan of Michael Peña. Not because I don't think he's a good actor, but literally I do just find his face annoying. So as shallow as that may be, it is reason enough for me. I thought, Scott, when you said there, like the obvious one that you thought people were going to mention, I thought you were going to say The Dark Knight Rises. So we're obviously going to have
obvious one, actually.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm going to throw it in there, and the reason I'm going to do that is I'm going to take the opportunity.
I'm almost disappointed by your throwing it in there, because you're going to do it by default and not give it a particularly glowing reference. So I'm sad
exactly.
about that.
But listen, that's why I want to throw it in. I want to chuck it in. If I didn't think it was up to it, I wouldn't mention it. But yeah, having watched it again since, I am more convinced of my initial assumption. I think it's the weakest of the trilogy.
Agreed.
But that's
damning with faint praise, isn't it?
Yeah, at the same time, I want people to understand that, yeah, I say that in the same way that if I said, okay, in a shootout between Lawrence of Arabia, Spartacus and Ben-Hur, I like Ben-Hur the least. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's not to detract from the film, and I don't disagree with anyone. And I know we had a discussion about it, but since then I've had this discussion with numerous other people, and even my wife, all of whom just sort of, they're like, what are you talking about? I don't buy it. I actually think it's probably, for me, it's one of Nolan's weakest films, and when I go back and view it objectively from the comfort of my sofa recently on Blu-ray, I'm like, right, okay, yep, no, I've made my mind up, that's cool, no, totally, I'm digging it, I really, really like it. It was better than any other blockbuster that I've seen this year, but I still don't think it's the masterpiece that people are making it out to be. I wasn't, in the same way that I wasn't sold on The Dark Knight, I'm even less sold on The Dark Knight Rises, and my preference for the trilogy goes first, second, third in order. But again, like I say, man, that's for any given value of quality on the Nolan scale.
I am not going to disagree with you. My order is still first, second, third. I don't know. I can see a case with The Dark Knight. I thought that was a very good film. They're at least, I suppose actually in my mind they're equal. I really liked The Dark Knight as much as I like Batman Begins, but I can certainly see the argument for Batman Begins being a little bit better. Dark Knight Rises is the weakest of the trilogy, and I'm pretty sure we said as much when we were talking about it in a bit more depth.
I didn't think we did, though. I thought you guys thought it was one of the better ones.
But no,
I thought I was the only one that said 1, 2, 3.
No, I'm pretty sure that we all said that The Dark Knight Rises was the worst of the one. It's certainly the ones where you can pick more faults with it.
Yeah,
it's the ones where the faults are more obvious. I just think that doesn't matter so much.
Yeah.
I can pick faults with The Dark Knight Rises, however, I'm picking faults with a series that I loved more than almost any series of films.
Yeah, exactly.
Ever.
Yeah, it's the case that it's not saying it's a bad film, it's saying it's just less awesome than these other ones.
Yes, yeah. But I mean, I still think that it is very awesome.
It's still great.
Yes, absolutely.
It doesn't immediately bubble to the top of my top 10 list this year or anything like that, but I still think it's a really solid. No, that's just giving it a short shrift. I think it's a really, really good film, and it's full of really nice ideas, and I really like it. It is the worst of the modern Batman trilogy. Certainly, I'll concede that, but I still think that is a watermark that is so high that the fact that this is bobbing slightly below it does not do it a disservice, and I think it's definitely worth seeing.
I've been trying to think of a suitable analogy, and to me, I imagine Christopher Nolan having made this film while he had a sort of mild to medium cold. I imagine he had like a mild head cold at the time he made this, and by the time it's finished, he's like, okay, we got through that. Like I say, on the Nolan scale's at a level above most other scales anyway.
Yeah. It's not even Nolan on an off day, it's Nolan on a day where he's somewhat distracted by a butterfly going past the window.
Yeah, a bee.
It's an excellent film.
It was still great, yeah.
Slightly less excellent than the others.
Yeah.
And I'm just hoping that for kids watching now in 20 years, that this is the trilogy they're talking about as opposed to, say, Star Wars, which I like less and less with every year that goes by.
Yeah.
Yeah, my biggest issue with it, I think, more than anything, I think in tone and flair and whatnot, it's probably equal to the two previous Nolan Batman films. But for me, the big letdown was that Bane as a villain just didn't interest me at all. The notion that let's have a villain whose main selling point is that he can punch Batman hard enough to hurt him. I'm like, okay, great. I'm not sold on that. I don't ever think. I mean, I'm not a comic aficionado. I've read a couple of Batman, like the Dark Knight series of comics and stuff. I've read the couple which this film is based on, or which rather this film drew from, and like I'm just not sold on Bane as a villain. He doesn't really interest me all that much. But it's still right up there.
It places a lot of stock on things that I suppose I can't quite talk about because they're spoilers, but if you're familiar with the tropes, it's Bane being the dragon rather than the big bad.
Yeah.
And if you knew that going into it, then perhaps you would have a different feel about the outcome, the last act. But no, by no means the best of the Batman films, but it's still a really bloody good film.
When it comes to any film that's come from comic books, even the worst of Nolan's Batman trilogy is all sorts of levels better than any other film.
Yeah, I'm not being funny. I mean, how many sort of since Memento? What's that? Is it 6 or 7 films now? Nolan's directed.
3
if you
Batman, Prestige,
if you exclude
Inception.
Following or whatever it's called, Inception, Memento. That's it, isn't it? So shall we say 6? Nolan is 6 for 6.
Yeah, and if you're only as good as your last film, then Chris Nolan has been immortal for so long.
Yeah, exactly. I still think Inception's his best film. Again, watched it recently, Blu-ray, and was annoyed by the actual amount of sort of exposition that goes on in dialogue, which I found quite detracting this time round. But still, on a fourth viewing, found stuff in there to enjoy that I hadn't sort of my brain hadn't been allocated sufficient time to sort of focus on the first 3 times. So, again, it's like, shit, okay, this guy knows what he's doing. Drew, want to throw something else in?
Yes. Now what I'd like to talk about is a film from Hong Kong, which is probably quite unlike anything we've talked about so far. It's quite a gentle film, quite sedately paced. Again, it's one of those films from this year that's had really good on-screen chemistry, actually. And that film is A Simple Life.
Oh, yes.
Which is, it's just lovely. It's just a nice film. It's quite gentle. It's sort of as well as being a relationship drama, really. It's a bit of an exploration of how a country like China deals with its ageing population. But it's got such believable characters, superb performances, engaging chemistry, and it's quite thought-provoking as well.
Yeah, it's a lovely film. Again, basically just based on such a lovely performances. The 2 central performances in that are so touching that it could get away with an awful lot, and it doesn't even need to get away with an awful lot. It's just a very touching tale of age, relationships as things go older. It just works very well, and I thought it was a charming film. Certainly one of the best things to come out of Asia this year.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Even from the confines of an economy airline seat, I managed to enjoy A Simple Life enough that, I would agree with it. It'd probably make it onto my list of favourites of the year. Andy Lau proving once again why he is one of the biggest stars in Hong Kong cinema, and that is because he is just as effective in quiet roles like this as he is playing action roles and all sorts. He's just a hugely versatile dude, and like I say, it's one of those films that sort of, you don't need to justify why you enjoyed it any more than it is just a lovely film. It's a fantastic change of pace from most of the other stuff that I watched this year.
You say change of pace, that's kind of something too. It's sometimes nice just to watch a film that isn't belting on at 100 miles per hour.
Yeah. And in which most people are being nice to each other and things like that.
It's gentle and it's got, actual believable humans in it.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of those things where there's not actually a lot to say about it. I'm racking for something insightful to say here, but I don't have anything insightful to say about it other than it's a lovely film and it's worth 2 hours of anyone's time.
Absolutely.
Scott, throw hats.
That arguably would be a little lower down on my list than mentioning here would perhaps imply, but it kind of fits in with a kind of low-key drama. I'm going to say the film Detachment, which is perhaps the least cheery film I've seen this year.
Goodness. It took me a moment to remember what you were talking about there. Then I remembered and my heart sank because that was depressing as all hell.
Tony Kaye's film, which has Adrian Brody as a supply teacher trying to get through to, in part, desperate inner city schools and also part-time child prostitutes. It is by no means a very happy film. It is one of the bleakest films that I've seen this year, and I remember getting to the end of this film and, almost contemplating slitting my wrists. It's one of those kind of films that really gets to you, it connects on a very real, visceral and emotional level, and it's the kind of film that demands more action. And I kind of wish that I could provide that kind of action that it's going for. I mean, it's like a call for revolt between the failings of the education system and how this should be a system that is there to help so many people, and it's the fact that it's failing hurts so many people. And this is a kind of documentary of that. It's obviously not a documentary; it's a fictional work, but it feels that it could be pulled from the pages of any number of, well, in this case specifically American newspapers, but anywhere around the world this could apply to equally well, and how we're kind of failing as a society. This is the obvious symbol that kind of gets ignored. When things start failing, often it happens first with kids and first in the school system, and the first line of response is teachers that really aren't properly equipped to handle this kind of thing, and it really drives all that kind of stuff home. If I was more pretentious, this is the kind of film that I would put at the top of my list, because it does highlight so many social issues that are very worthy. As it stands, because the subject matter is so bleak, it's difficult to enjoy it.
It doesn't fulfil the description of entertainment so much.
No. But I think it's a really powerful work of cinema, and it demands viewing. I really think it does. If you've ever thought about cinema as anything that can possibly affect any kind of change in emotions or behaviour, then you really owe it to yourself to see Detachment. It's a powerful, powerful work. Yeah. Not enjoyable in the slightest, but very few more powerful and emotional level films that I've seen this year.
Yeah, I think powerful is a word that all three of us would be rather reticent to use with films, so it's rather it's bandied around with gay abandon by so many other people, but this film genuinely is powerful.
Yeah.
It's very, very affecting, but it's fortunately very rewarding to watch, not by no means enjoyable. You're not going to feel happy watching this, but it's absolutely something you should watch. I think if you just watched films that did nothing but completely entertain you, without your brain being engaged, or were only happy films, you're doing yourself a disservice, and you're not really getting a proper spread of cinema.
Yeah, indeed. So, again, not one I've seen. I probably won't catch up with it, given it's the downbeat, the excellent yet downbeat recommendation you've given it. I would, I don't know if how could I forget? Arguably the film event of the year for me, in terms of anticipation, certainly. And now that I have time to think about it, it's not as high in the canon as I'd hoped, but again, we have to talk about Skyfall.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
Which was certainly the best Bond film released this year. We spoke a couple of podcasts ago about how I'd come out of the cinema and riding the crest of that wave of Bond high. I think I'd tweeted that, oh goodness, it probably is the best Bond film. And then a couple of hours later I thought, no, it's probably not actually, but it is one of the best, I would argue, probably the best directed Bond film. I don't think it avoids as many sort of tropes and cliches as people are making out. I think the people who...
Well, it even starts to add in some sort of Bond history that could be going that way. So.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, and that's the point at which I think, I wish you hadn't have done that. But I really can't get on board with these people who are saying, it's stupid, this is the year, this is the year that Bond should have made an impact on the Oscars, this should have had, a Best Picture nomination or blah, blah, blah. I think, no, really, let's come back down to reality. I know everyone's saying, okay, even if I accepted the argument that it was the best Bond film, I still wouldn't accept an argument to say that it was one of the best films of the year. From a filmmaking standpoint, one of the most entertaining films of the year, and one of the most rewarding sort of action/thriller films of the year, that for once just happened to be the Bond film. I think any number of the technical aspects of it are fantastic. I think Javier Bardem made for a great villain. Mm-hmm. Daniel Craig was on top form, but it is by no means an awards film of the year contender. Let's be realistic about that. It's got. I think it still has a long way to go before you could argue that. No, but in terms of entertainment, I mean, I came out on a complete high, and I thought, yeah, that's brilliant. That's money well spent. I bought my family tickets. We went to see it. I spent like 40 quid or something, paying 5 of us in to go and see it. And like, I if I'd come out and spent 40 quid just seeing it on my own, I probably would have not felt hard done by. But the fact I was sat there with 5 members of my family at the same time, I was like, yeah, that's bargain. Loved it.
No, and let's not dismiss the value of entertainment. That is a valuable function of cinema, and it's what it's there for. And are you not entertained, as Gladiator might tell you, but no, Skyfall is very entertaining. It would, even with the number of flaws that I'm sure we picked over at length in the film podcast review of it, it would still probably make the lower end of my top 10 films of this year.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot to recommend in it. Sure, there's some things that don't work quite so well, but as a film, it's tremendously entertaining. It does so many things correctly that it's difficult not to see it as one of the better films of the year. There's an awful lot to like in there, and I think you'd have to be very curmudgeonly not to respect an awful lot of things in there. There's a question of, and we've asked this question since at least, well, certainly Quantum of Solace, but perhaps Casino Royale, is where's Bond going to go next? Is it going to zig back to the old school, or is it going to zag to the newer, perhaps more forward-looking things? Arguably, Skyfall is really falling between two stools. It's trying to be modern at the same time as it's trying to be
it's a bizarre kind of progressive retroactive vibe it's got going on. Yeah,
it's unfortunately just seemed like it's trying to head back towards the old school. Some of the inclusions in it.
I guess we'll see where that resolves itself next time
a
round.
lot of the speculation there is that it was fulfilling some sort of 50th anniversary mandate on behalf of the studio, who wanted it to be, in a sense, a celebration of the previous Bond films, and the way to do that was to be nostalgic about it. But for me, that was the element of it that misfired the most and that disappointed me the most.
It was close to the least of it. I think that and some... There's elements towards Javier Bardem's character motivation and his techniques that are somewhat opaque to me and didn't really function particularly well, without going into too much detail. But that aside, and it's quite easy to dispatch that. I mean, we've seen so many Bond films where so much more ridiculous shit happens that I'm not going to pick Skyfall apart.
Yeah, and this film doesn't have a hover gondola.
There's no hover gondolas or pigeons making a double take.
Takes, yeah.
So we'll cut it a slack on that basis, and I think it's a great film.
So this film is almost exactly the opposite of what most Roger Moore Bond films were.
Yeah.
So, that's better in every way.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's definitely worth looking at. If you've even a passing interest in James Bond films, then why haven't you seen Skyfall? And if you haven't, you should.
My parents went to see this a couple of months ago, despite the fact that my mum's a huge Judi Dench fan. She can't stand Daniel Craig. Came back raving about this film.
Excellent, cool.
Also, a lot there for a lot of people.
And significantly, it's the first Bond film to drop the F-bomb.
Fuck.
Yeah. I know that is both of great and no significance at the same time.
I hadn't even noticed it happened.
Can I ask where that did happen? I don't know. I genuinely don't know.
At the end, where Judi Dench, where M and what's his name, the gamekeeper, what was his name again?
I can't remember. Albert Finney.
Yeah, Albert Finney, but his character.
Finney, yes, McAllister.
Just call Albert Finney because I can't remember his name.
Judi Dench something, and it's Judi Dench. She drops it. She says something about I fucked up, and it wasn't until after we came at the cinema, and I said, "Did Judi Dench drop the F-bomb?" And I was like, "Yeah." I'm like, all right, okay. I wasn't just imagining it. And to me, I kind of felt like, was that strictly necessary? I know you're sort of aiming for a more sort of serious adult tone, but I don't need you to get all sweary to do it. We've existed on 22 films without the necessity for that so far. It's not a necessary part of breaking away from the old, but at the same time, it's like, okay, I can, I don't place too much significance on it.
I mean, there are a couple of problems I had with it. Some sort of silly stuff like using trains as a weapon, but they're the only...
What are you saying, they're impractical, like?
Somewhat unwieldy, certainly. The only genuinely disappointing moment in that film, though, which could have been a really good moment, was the ejector button.
Yeah, we spoke about that in the podcast, didn't we? That really pissed me off, actually. It went a bit too far. You're like, yeah, you
Exactly. See, you've just seen him toying with it.
Yeah.
That's brilliant because, and then like putting the cap back down. It's
without the camera,
to Goldfinger, but then
without the camera cutting back to Dench, and going, oh, what are you going to do? Eject me? Ha ha ha.
Yeah, without bringing the god awful the concept of trying to bring any kind of chronological order to these Bond films, which you could probably write a thesis on this by this point. I wouldn't want to touch it. Of all the films where you don't want to really bring up the past, I would imagine Bond is the one thing where you should explicitly say, do not bring up any references to previous films, because it will create a shitstorm in any number of scenarios.
I just wanted them to break away completely, and on this I think they kind of defeated the purpose of having done that, and I'm now worried that the next film is going to be regressive and I am no longer going to be a James Bond fan.
The next film basically reinvents James Bond as Doctor Who for some reason. Yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, all that aside, fantastically entertaining and definitely one of the best Bond films we've had so far. And
Absolutely.
I know people have their qualms with Quantum of Solace, but I still think if you look at the 3 Craig Bond films, I think that's an incredibly strong hand to play in the bigger picture of the series as a whole, and Daniel Craig is the best Bond, full stop. So,
as much as it hurts my Scottish heart to say so,
yeah,
I'm going to have to agree with you.
I probably have to agree with that, yeah.
Totally, it hurts me as well, but we can't cling on to that pride any longer. There's no disputing the man is the heavyweight champion of Bond.
Although, I think of 3 favourite Bond films, and Connery's still in one of them, so I'll keep that. Keep it warm.
Yeah, exactly.
Keep that flame alive, Drew. Keep that flame alive.
That's it. Keep that DVD up your sleeve. Okay, so I'm sort of exhausted the stuff that I really enjoyed that I saw this year, but are we at the stage of honourable mentions yet, or is there anything you guys want to...
I was going to ask Scott, because I've got a few I want to mention, but just for maybe a sentence or two.
There's maybe a couple that I would think do a disservice to calling Bubbling Under. I will mention first Life of Pi, which...
I've forgotten about that because we've just seen it's not on my list yet. Life of Pi is excellent.
Life of Pi is a really brilliant film, allegorical in nature. However, it is such a visually and narratively stunning bit of work. There's so much imagination going into both the book and, of course, the novel here. And Ang Lee and the cinematographer has done such a tremendous job of bringing that to screen.
Absolutely.
It just looks fabulous.
It is. It's a visually arresting film. It's really beautiful.
Not much more to say about it than that. It's a terrific bit of cinema, and if it's still around in the cinemas just now, if you've missed it so far, get your ass down to cinema and see it. It looks beautiful, and there's a lot of really nice things to enjoy in there. Some brilliant performances. I really enjoyed Life of Pi. If I was doing this in some kind of order, would probably be higher up in this list, I think. I'm always a bit dodgy in these kind of things, so I like to give it a bit of time to sink in. And Life of Pi obviously just came out a couple of weeks back, but Life of Pi, definitely one of the best films to come out in 2012.
Yeah, absolutely. And if the number of people in the cinema when I saw it today is anything to go by, it's going to be around a good few weeks yet.
And it deserves that. It really does.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's excellent.
What else have you got on your not quite bubbling under list, Scott?
On the borderline of this, perhaps, again, just a film that I enjoyed tremendously. It has its flaws, and you can debate these as life goes on, and it's not as high as perhaps some of the director's previous other works, but Seven Psychopaths
it's fun.
Is a tremendous amount of fun. It is, as crime kind of capers go, it manages to kind of walk that line between just being between a caper itself and kind of self-parody, and it works really well. And there's a lot of really good performances. Colin Farrell is not someone you'd immediately peg as being one of cinema's great straight men, but he really does a fantastic job here of being the kind of grounding influence to the oddball shenanigans of
in stark
Sam
contrast
Rockwell.
to another film we'll mention.
Sam Rockwell and Chris Walken, who are just kind of bouncing off the walls, and he gives this great grounding performance to it. Sure, you can pick flaws with it, and it's not as good.
That's a narrative disaster zone.
It definitely is. The narrative might as well not exist. It's basically just trying to be a parody of these kind of films. But even with that in mind, it still works so tremendously well that I can give it a pass. It's not as good as In Bruges. In Bruges is a better film from the same kind of half the same cast and the same director. But Seven Psychopaths, definitely worth looking, and again, may just about be in cinemas. I'm not quite sure if it's vanished just yet, but give that a look if you've missed it so far.
I can get behind that. I feel like I kind of shot my boat early with Headhunters, which I put in kind of for the sake of having something to say. I should have kind of left it for honourable mentions, but on that topic, a couple of films I greatly enjoyed earlier in the year. First of all, The Descendants. Which I'd almost forgotten about, and a great performance from George Clooney. Again, quite a sort of subtle, unobtrusive piece, which is arguably greater than the sum of its parts. And perhaps the only film to date that features a good performance by Matthew Lillard.
He's good in Trouble with the Curve, actually, because he's meant to be an arsehole and he does it supremely.
It's almost the role he was born to play. And also around the same time, and I think we might even have discussed it in the same podcast, was The Woman in Black, which I wasn't cock-a-hoop about, and I haven't sort of rushed to catch up with it again, but I think was notable for a couple of reasons, possibly even 3 reasons. and that is that in a market saturated by the most cynical shit imaginable, it managed to do something interesting within the horror genre, in that it was very much a return to the old school understanding of atmosphere and pacing and suggestion over and above outright sort of nonsense taking place front and centre in the frame. No blood to speak of, no gore to speak of, existed purely on atmosphere, regardless of the questions over the character's supposed age. I think Daniel Radcliffe did a pretty decent job with the character. Most significantly for me, I think, is the notion of it spearheading the more commercial thrust of Hammer's reboot. Hammer Studios, I think Wakewood was their first release, which I think was straight to video and was kind of interesting, done on a shoestring. Didn't quite work, but I'm quite happy for them if this is their intent, is to approach this model in the notion of, okay, let's do a larger budget, more commercial thing like The Woman in Black in order to float these other smaller budget ones, that we can do something a little bit more adult and a little bit more, what's the word I want, a little darker with, then that's going to be really interesting to see what they come out with. And it was quite a trick they pulled in a film which I know it was toned down slightly at the request of the BBFC to maintain a 12 certificate, but at that 12 certificate level, it easily qualified in terms of being unsettling far more than any other horror film I've seen with either a 15 or an 18 certificate, thus bearing out that horror as a genre should not be, or horror as a reaction to something on screen is entirely removed from buckets of blood being thrown around a set, torture porn, however you want to refer to that genre that's sort of been popularised by the Saw films and things. Horror is a genre in and of itself, and I don't really qualify stuff like that as horror. If you want me to be scared or unsettled by something, then The Woman in Black didn't give me nightmares, but it was a far better example of how to get to that end point than any other horror film I've seen in the last 5 years, possibly. So I think it's notable for quite a few reasons, and more power to Hammer if they're going to approach it from that viewpoint. They have demonstrated clearly that they've got a better understanding of horror than any American studio. So good on them. Can't wait to see what they wait to see what else they put out.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the days when I would award a film the least awful horror film of the year award, it would definitely go to The Woman in Black. It is not only not quite a decent horror film, it's actually quite a decent film.
Yeah, full stop.
It's just pretty solid all round. Yeah, I enjoyed that quite a bit.
Yeah, I've not seen it yet, but the fact that I would even consider the notion of watching it just on the recommendation of you two fellows means it must be a lot better than you'd normally expect.
It's definitely worth a look at and catch up at this point, yep.
I can't quite believe this. We're talking about top films of the year, and this year saw the latest film from one of my all-time favourite filmmakers, one of the most distinctive filmmakers working in Hollywood just now, and somehow managed to forget that it existed. So I'll be making an appointment with a psychiatrist in the morning. But in the meantime, I'd just like to mention the awesome film that is Moonrise Kingdom. Mm-hmm. This is all. Just watch Moonrise Kingdom because Wes Anderson's great.
That's what I like. Brief and to the point.
That's it. Scott, what was your...
I rate that. I really like Moonrise Kingdom. I think it's actually of this year. As with every year, I kind of look back and think, well, this year wasn't that great for films. Then I kind of put a list together and think, actually, there's quite a lot of films I like this year. Moonrise Kingdom would not immediately bubble to the top of that list, but it's very, very strong. Lots of really great performances, top direction, brilliant cast. Yeah, lots of really strong things to recommend that. I really like Moonrise Kingdom. The other film that I really, really enjoyed, with a slight proviso that I watched it very recently, so perhaps maybe with the benefit of time, maybe this might come down a little bit, but The Impossible, in terms of emotional impact of films, this has to be the strongest film I've seen possibly this year. Lots of really great impactful performances, and the central story itself, just the heartrending tale of a family being torn apart and then coming back together, really does give a lot of emotional credence to it. Arguably slightly cynical in the way it's pulling on your heartstrings, but it really pulls on your heartstrings so effectively that I can forgive it that. Yeah, great film, very powerful stuff. Really like that a lot.
Yeah, it's very good. It doesn't feel manipulative.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
it feels believable.
I don't think a film like that necessarily can pull on your heartstrings too much, because the scale of the turmoil it's trying to convey sort of necessitates that is the film's remit. So yeah, definitely one I'd like to catch up with.
Okay, Stokies.
Drew, back to you. Now, before I move on to what I really want to do, which is to have a wee rant about what's probably the biggest disappointment of my year in terms of film, there's a couple of films I'd just like to mention that people might want to check out. They're definitely worthwhile doing so. First is, it's a rather odd film, and it's got somebody in it who I really don't like, but who keeps surprising me by being actually a really good actor, even though he's clearly a pillock. And that's Sean Penn's film, This Must Be the Place, which is... It's a strange wee beastie.
Absolutely, yeah.
And in it, Sean Penn's a strange wee beastie. It's kind of hard to relate the story quite quickly. Sean Penn plays a washed-up rocker who's estranged from his family and lives several thousand miles away from them, and goes on a little road trip after his father's death to examine his relationship with his father. It's really, really weird, but it's touching. It's very funny. And in fact, I'll not spend too much more time on it. Just give yourself a wee treat. It's not what you'd expect, and it's actually really good.
So, you should give yourself a wee treat. It makes me want to go and buy a bag of sweets, not watch a Sean Penn film.
Oh, Argentina.
Oh, don't.
May I just say I concur?
Certainly.
One of the more obscure and bizarre films you'll see this year. It's troubling to try and fit into any kind of conventional narrative, but This Must Be the Place works very well. Give it a look. It's
almost as odd as me recommending a Sean Penn film, albeit, I mean, things like Milky is great, it's just Sean Penn's not very likeable. Almost as odd as that is recommending a film with Keira Knightley in it. Yeah. As well as Keira Knightley does have the generally excellent Steve Carell. That film is Seeking a Friend for the End of the World, about two people finding each other and starting a relationship in the last 3 weeks of the Earth's existence before everybody gets wiped out by an asteroid. And while that may sound depressing, it's actually partially comedic. It's another film actually where chemistry plays quite a part in it, and it's another film, it's just nice. There's a nice chemistry in the characters, there's a lot of black humour, but there's a lot of fun to be had as well, and it's worth checking out. It's not your average romantic comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Which was almost exactly the feedback I had from my wife, who has watched it, though I have not. Yes.
So she likes it, yes.
Which is good in a year where I've not had so many comedies I would normally like to put in a top 10 list. I like to have comedies and bring them to the fore, but there's not really been too many this year that floated my boat, but that was certainly one of them.
Well, The Dictator's not in your top 10 list?
No.
Okay, just a couple more mention. Just got to mention some before I go on my wee rant. The Angels Share. Yeah, there haven't been as many outstanding comedies, but that one, it was a film not without its flaws, but it was funny, the characters were likeable, and even though the two disjointed halves of the film didn't fit that well together, it was so entertaining that that rather made up for it. And it's Ken Loach stuff's generally watchable, and it's nice seeing a film set in Scotland, which doesn't happen all that often.
No.
Yeah, that's another lovely little comedy. Maybe a little bit too parochial. I don't know how well this plays outside of Scotland, let alone the UK.
Yes.
But for what it's worth, I thought it was very good. I really like that film. Definitely one of my bubbling under lists.
So, I've got two films I'd like to mention more. First one is The Amazing Spider-Man. I think we've all been sick of comic book films for quite a while. Didn't really think Spider-Man needed another film, but turns out it's quite an entertaining one. It's probably as good as the first Sam Raimi film was, and if you like Spider-Man, you'd want to see it.
Yeah.
Doesn't require an awful lot more coverage than that. And one other film I'd like to mention, once again in a year with a Pixar film, the best animated film of the year, not by Pixar. And we're certainly not as big of fans of Pixar around here as so many other people seem to be. But a really interesting animated film to watch out for this year, which should be available on Blu-ray, etc. by now, is Paranorman.
Exactly.
From the creators of the excellent Coraline. It doesn't quite hit the standards of that excellent piece, but it's really funny, the characters are engaging, the animation's lovely, and it's really a wee treat.
A wee treat. Scott, did you have anything else to add?
A lovely little film. You alluded to it briefly earlier. Searching for Sugar Man, I think, is a really interesting documentary about the tale of trying to find
I didn't allude to it earlier because remember, you're editing that bit out.
I absolutely am. Definitely worth a look in terms of a documentary based around trying to find the legends of past folk heroes, the kind of days when you didn't have the same kind of interest on the same kind of immediate access on the internet as you do these days. Really well put together, really quite enjoyable. Enjoyed that an awful lot. One film that actually technically doesn't qualify, but I have it down on my list for this year due to a slight clerical error, is The Artist from last year, the black and white gimmicked film, as you may recall it. It seems uncouth not to capture it somewhere. I like The Artist an awful lot, not so much as everyone else. It's actually technically was released on like the 26th or something of December last year, so it doesn't quite fit the eligibility criteria for this, but I don't quite hold it in so high esteem as everyone else, but I liked The Artist enough to at least mention it somewhere in these kind of best of the year things. It's worth doing that.
Yeah, Artist is good. And just on that note of like technically not being eligible, I think we actually saw it on the same day, Scott. Another film that had come out at the end of last year, we didn't see till this year. Worth the mention was Hugo.
Yes, that was actually down on my list a little further down. I was going to introduce it as the other kind of kid-orientated film that you should see this year. I'm actually slightly disappointed that I didn't see this in 3D because...
From what I've heard, it's one of those films that did seem to get it. Perhaps not surprising with somebody as great as Scorsese.
Yeah,
it's a good film. It seems in danger at the start of being a farce and with a really unlikable kid, but stick with it past the first 20 minutes and it's very, very rewarding.
I stuck with it to past the hour mark and then gave up on it because I found it incredibly dull and shit. I can't put my judgment across any more than that. I absolutely hated it. I have no idea what anyone's interest in it was. I don't know what Scorsese was playing at. I look at it and think, Martin Scorsese, really? I don't get it. Similarly, The Artist, I gave half an hour. Shit. Bored.
Seeing as we're on things that you hate that everyone else loves, I will at least mention The Avengers. I'm not going to put it as even in the top 10 list, but I thought it was very enjoyable. Obviously you didn't. You can check Craig's blog for that, for an incredibly detailed reason of why I didn't, but I thought that in terms of brainless action cinema, I thought it was fine. I enjoyed my time with it. In terms of things I enjoyed without having really too many complaints with it, I would probably limit it to Ruby Sparks. Again, a somewhat whimsical tale of love and how that affects people, but again, Paul Dano I just really like as a performer, and I think he does really well in the central character of this. It's not even remotely realistic, but it's quite a lot of fun to watch. I would certainly at least give that a consideration as you pass by it. The other one that is flawed up the wazoo, but it generated enough discussion that I think is probably worth people going to see it for so they can think about it themselves, is Looper. It's not the strongest film I've seen this year for reasons that we discussed in quite some depth.
Yes, it was my disappointment of the year. I was going to go into that later.
Yeah, that was the one I was going to have to ran on.
Well, I will cede the floor to you guys. I thought it interesting enough to at least see so we can talk about, which is probably why you want to rant about it.
Yeah.
Basically my reason for it being there. I thought the fact that it is in a cinematic landscape that is so bloody monochromatic as it is just now, the fact that this is different and let us talk about it so much at least makes it worthy of recommending that people go and see it rather than seeing...
Yeah, I'd recommend people go and see it just so they can form an opinion on it, but I don't recommend it as a film at all because it made me incredibly angry.
Yeah, and I'm sure we discussed that in length and time, so I will cede the floor to Drew who wants to talk about it, so go ahead.
There are two types of disappointment in film, really. One is simply something where the concept perhaps interests you and it falls spectacularly flat. It's very just badly executed. The other kind is rather more specialised, and it's where perhaps you have all the things that could make a really, really great film, and then, for no good reason at all, something so spectacularly stupid is put right in the middle of it that ruins everything. Mm-hmm. And this is Looper, one of 3 Joseph Gordon-Levitt films I saw this year. One of, I believe, all 3 of our favourite actors. Once was in The Dark Knight Rises, which was excellent. Once was in Premier Rush, which was annoying, and I wanted to see his head crushed by an 18-wheeler. But the third was Looper, which looked so promising. And watching it, it was fantastic for the first hour.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The performances were great. I was really enjoying it. I liked the world. I mean, in the first hour, the only couple of minor annoyances were stupid things like hover bikes, which had no reason to exist, but I wasn't going to let that bother me. That was a silly bit of design. But then, right about halfway, what had been possibly one of the best, if not the best, first hours of film in cinema in 2012 They basically, oh wait, magic, and ruined it. Yeah. Absolutely spectacularly destroyed the film. And what makes me so angry about that, apart from the fact that the magic seems so stupid and it didn't make any sense in the film at all, it was so unnecessary. The film was set up in such a way that the things that happen in the second half of the film could have and should have happened and had good reasons to happen without this thing. And it's just such a squandered opportunity, and it makes me really, really angry that it was in there because it makes no sense at all.
My beef with Looper is specifically, I would like to approach it under the terms of the Sales of Goods Act. And I'm deadly serious about that, is that I have an explicit understanding with my cinema providers that they will advertise to me a selection of films. These advertisements will give me an idea of what it is I'm expected to pay my £8 to go and see, and then I will go and see that film. And maybe it will be good, maybe it will be bad, maybe it will be somewhere in the middle, but it will most definitely be the film that I was promised. Where I have an issue with Looper is not that the second half of it was shit, it's that the second half of it was not the film that I paid to see.
The second half of it has nothing to do with the first half, it seems.
The second half is completely detached, bar one little bit at the end, which seems to be like, oh yeah, remember this film was about to be time travel. It was supposed to be about that. Yeah, quick, backpedal. I was and not in a clever way. I was really, really disappointed. I was more angry than disappointed, to be honest. And like you say, Drew, I would agree. I think we spoke about it before that. Yeah, it was the best first half of any film I'd seen this year, and it was also the worst second half. And I can't abide that. Had it remained thematically on target throughout and just had a really crap second half, I would not have the issues with it that I do now. I would just say what a disappointing second half it is, but I am incredibly angry about it because, again, it was not the film I paid to see. I was explicitly led to believe this was a film whose plot revolved around time travel. I was not going to see a poor remake of Carrie / The Rage / Scanners. So for that reason, Rian Johnson can fuck right off. And he will have a lot of work to do with his next film if he is going to convince me to pay £8 to go and see that in a cinema. I would be intrigued, having downloaded his sort of in-cinema commentary, to go back and see this in a cinema and listen to his explanation of events. However, I will not pay money to do that. So that's my stance on it. I'm deadly serious when I say that it actually made me angry more than anything, and the more I've thought about it since, the more I think, no, I should have the right to ask for my money back for that, but I didn't think about that at the time. So like going and buying a new car, and then after you've owned it for 6 months, the next 6 months it's turned into a push bike.
That would still be inconvenient.
Or a hover bike, you know.
I'm probably not as annoyed as you guys are about the final third of the film.
No, you're no longer our friend.
But I certainly can't disagree with anything that you're saying there. I still say that the first 2/3 of it is interesting enough. Warren, at least looking at it, your mileage may vary, but you know that's my take on it. If you want me to give you a film that I thought was genuinely disappointing this year, for me this year it's Prometheus.
Yeah.
Because I had so high hopes for this. So of course it's the return of Ridley Scott to the Aliens franchise, although somehow he's trying to desperately backpedal from it for some reasons that I don't quite understand. But it's quite obviously part of the Aliens franchise, and it's just not very good entry into the Aliens franchise. There's a lot.
It's in fact so bad, Scott, it undermines all the other films.
There's
I don't know about that so much. Yeah.
There's things in there that I kind of appreciate, but I had so much hope going into this, especially given the cast and the people behind it, that this would be something truly spectacular. And I've got something that is, you know, the fact that you come out of this kind of wondering, is this better or worse than Alien Resurrection, is not what I expected going into it, because I thought this would be mind-blowing, and my mind was definitely not blown by it.
It's resolutely unblown.
It's not a bad film, which is why I wouldn't want to say I wouldn't want to dissuade anyone from seeing it, especially if you did like the Aliens franchise beforehand.
You kind of have to see it to make your own mind up about it. Yeah, it's one of those.
Exactly, but it's just one of these films that I thought this is going to be so cool. And I mean, I'm not even looking at it thinking, is this better or worse than Alien Resurrection? You're thinking, is this better or worse than Aliens versus Predator? And And that's just not what I expected from this. I had so high hopes going for it. It just seemed to be like the rolling back of everything bad that happened to the Aliens franchise. And this is an opportunity to start again, and they just blew it. I just don't think there's anything interesting in here at all.
I wanted so badly to like it that I paid it the courtesy of doing what I said we would do in the original podcast and revisited it later on. So I thought, oh, surely this is just a case of I was having a bad day or something. Yeah. The day it became available on demand, queued up a nice little HD copy of it, and 2.5 hours later, Kate and I were looking at each other going, nah, we were right, weren't we? It is actually pretty poor.
Yeah.
In terms of expectations met, I mean, like you say, it's not like a particularly terrible film, but with that sort of weight of expectation behind it.
It's definitely competent, and in sci-fi fiction goes, there's probably not been too many films better than it this year. However, in terms of what I really hoped that it would be, it's just not even in the same league. It's not even playing the same game.
It's the one film of that kind that actually you dared to hope about. A lot of people were being cynical about it beforehand, but like you say, given the talent involved, people are like, oh, Ridley Scott's off the boil and blah, blah, and you're like, yeah, but he still gave us Aliens. He's the man who knows this material better than anyone, and I will dare to hope that he is actually going to prove everyone wrong. And he made so many obvious errors. I'm like,
And the problem is, I mean, there are problems with it, even like technically, like for some reason forcing Noomi Rapace to use an English accent for no appreciable reason.
Yeah.
Which sort of just means she can't perform as well as she could. I think the idea of sort of searching for the genesis of humans or something is quite interesting, but it's got sod all to do with the Alien films. It's so obviously retrofitted. And I think, as you both mentioned during our previous podcast, you can see the joins.
Yeah.
And it's just an opportunity squandered, I think.
Definitely. A huge opportunity squandered. I didn't even feel that on the budget that it was thrown at it, that it actually even delivered on just visual spectacle. I mean, there's no doubting it. It looked nice, but it didn't even sort of succeed 100% on that scale either. So that was my one genuine disappointment of the year. Looper made me angry. Total Recall, which we'll talk about in a minute, we knew was going to be crap anyway. There was no expectation of...
Yeah, you didn't expect good. The only way that could have worked out is that we were pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, Prometheus is the one film that we actually dared hope for, that, and we're geared up for the first 6 months of this year, and it was a bit of a letdown.
May I just mention the standard disclaimer that I normally work at the start of these podcasts. I haven't seen everything this year that I would like to, for which I apologise profusely, but I have a life. So there are certain films that I think I would probably really like. Things like Amour, things like Beasts of the Southern Wild, which they seem like everything that is there that I would really love to like in a film, but I've just not quite got around to it yet. I'll try and fill that in and post a review later on in the year. All of the things that I've seen this year, so far you have had my best take on it. Are we now at the point where we're dealing with things that we really didn't like at all?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. In which case...
Are you throwing your hat into the ring first here, Scott?
Yes.
Or perhaps because it's a bad film, you want to throw something other than a hat?
I will throw everything that I have, mainly my vomit, at the film this year that had been presented to me as being a good film to look at. I had a lot of positive things to go in there. Would be Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. Johann Safran Foer. And I said this at the time, I've read his books, I've never liked them, I just don't understand what's so positive about them. He has these weird prepubescent characters that somehow talk like they have the wisdom of a 90-year-old person who's lived all their experiences. It is in no way realistic, and Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close has some of the most annoying characters in it. There are a few actually pretty good performances in there. You know, it's got guys like Max von Sydow, who does quite well. John Goodman does a decent little bit part. Tom Hanks, a pretty good role, but the central performance from Thomas Horn, the youngster, and I don't like picking on youngsters, it seems not quite fair, but the character that this guy has to portray really just is not even remotely realistic, and it's just annoying. The first hour of the film is very, very annoying, and that's the worst part of it. There's just not enough to really get your teeth around here. It's a silly story. The central character is predicated around being essentially completely unbelievable from the get-go, and that really hurts it for me. I have no doubt you can pick any number of films that are actually worse on an empirical basis. Any number of no-budget horror films are going to be empirically worse than this film, but of the films that I thought could possibly have some kind of redemption to it, and some kind of hope to it, and some kind of actual emotional bond to it, this is the one film that pushed me away and said, no, I'm just going to be incredibly annoying instead of drawing into this film. I'm going to push you away as hard as I possibly can. And so that's why this film makes my shit list of the year.
Is it also not just incredibly irresponsible in that it suggests that a child of that age should wander freely around the various districts of New York on some ill-advised, inverted colons, adventure, and that it will be a life-affirming journey populated by affable characters, and at no point will that child be raped and murdered?
I'm sure that you could unleash any 9-year-old upon New York City, and they would be granted a starring role in Law and Order Special Criminal Investigation, or whatever it would be. No, there's really not an awful lot to like about this film, and there's the odd good performance, but for what I hoped would be a really powerful bit of cinema, it's just actually really quite repellent, and I've no interest in watching it again, ever. So, no.
It was one of those films that, for me, I mean, obviously I know that it's from a source material, but one thinks that source material was probably picked by committee as just a hugely cynical attempt at being worthy.
Yeah,
we will commit this to screen, and it will, by virtue of the notion of the source material, be deemed worthy regardless of how we handle it. And no one stopped to think actually how stupidly far-fetched and ill-conceived that concept is, and just actually how the vast majority of us probably look at those characters and think they're just cloyingly annoying rather than people we can empathise with.
Completely. Yes. You can see what they're going for. It just really falls short on so many levels that, God, no.
It's almost that notion of, like, it could almost be seen as some sort of modern fairy tale kind of thing, but I'm sorry, that it just doesn't work.
Precisely.
Try at least having characters who are affable and with whom I feel some sort of bond, rather than being, as you say, this bizarre. It's as if Quentin Tarantino wrote a child-friendly character who was a child. His mouth is full of dialogue that no 9-year-old would realistically come within a moonshot of.
It will come as no surprise that it's from the director of The Reader, which I'm pretty sure was one of our worst films of a few years back.
Terrible.
And also,
everybody else obviously was wrong because it's awful.
It's dreadful, and I've not seen it myself, but if I mention the hours to Drew, he will say,
for fuck's sake, probably. and lots of other worse swear words, which I'm not going to commit to this recording.
Precisely, So perhaps I shouldn't have got my hopes up in the first place, but what can you do? I'm a creature born of pure hope, and I hope that everything will be great.
Nice one. Drew, what raised your hackles?
I think we actually had a rather unfortunate podcast. Our 96th podcast had 3 of the worst films I'd seen all year in one episode, which was rather unfortunate. The 2 I'll mention just now, though, and I'll just mention it very quickly. One was Tim and Eric's $1 billion movie, which I took a punt on. I knew nothing about the programme. I'd seen a couple of YouTube clips.
I wish I'd warned you about it sooner.
Well, you seem to be quite excited from interested from the trailer.
Yeah.
My God, what a spectacular shitfest in more ways than one. It is one of the worst things I've ever seen, and I don't say that lightly. It's hugely self-indulgent, spectacularly unfunny. Yes, don't ever watch that.
I can't think why I didn't warn you off it, other than that I just assumed that you weren't even going to bother looking at it in the first place.
I didn't know you'd seen it, because I knew you'd posted a couple of things about the trailer.
Yeah, no.
Just brought it to my attention.
I watched it a couple of months before it was discussed on the podcast, and was that one of the podcasts I wasn't... I think that's why I was away, wasn't it? So I wasn't able to chip in, but I was listening. I was listening to it, thinking, "Oh God, I wish I'd actually fired a flare sooner."
Did you agree with what I said?
And then some.
Yes. Another film in that, which was called A Few Best Men, which I've seen a trailer for. Didn't think much of it. I thought, but it's there. I'll watch. I'm just in the mood for something light. Oh dear. Oh dearie me, because basically that film is Death at a Funeral, which we all 3 of us here despised because it's achingly unfunny.
Modern classic, I thought we said.
It is Death at a Funeral, and I genuinely didn't know before going in that it was from the same guy. But I was sitting watching it thinking, what is this? This is like Death at a Funeral, but with like different characters and a wedding, but otherwise it's the same film. Get out, I check IMDb, and it's the same guy, so apparently he's got one film in him. It's a terrible film, and that's definitely one to avoid because it's really, 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 really not funny.
And I'm assuming that the third film you want to talk about is the ne plus ultra, the veritable apex that highlights the pointlessness of the current spat of remakes.
Yes, that is the one I'm leaving to your good self,
Oh,
Mr. Eastman.
right, okay. I'm not going to have the rant about this that I think you guys expected, because it's not a film that's worth
It's
leveling.
not a film you can rant about, it's just too shit to rant about.
It's not worth leveling the vitriol at, to be honest. I wouldn't even bring out the box of Swan Vestas to light the fuse on the vitriol cannon, never mind actually bother.
It's more of a
queuing the thing
puzzled
up.
fly, isn't it? Yeah.
It's bizarre that, like we've discussed this many times before, that a better approach would be to take a film that didn't work and had no sort of people had no fondness for, that was a missed opportunity the first time round, and remake that and try and do something better, rather than take these iconic films that are of their time and simply put a modern sort of CG obsessed spin on them.
Yeah, if you do something like the Coen brothers did with True Grit, it's like, we'll just take another crack at this novel rather than like directly remaking a film, which obviously wasn't very good anyway because it's got John Wayne in it.
Yeah, exactly. I never understood why True Grit was held in regard anyway, because John Wayne hasn't made a single good film, never did make a good film, sorry. So that isn't a rare example of here is a film in which we have a point, and I think probably the Coen brothers were thinking that, and out of respect they didn't want to say it.
Yeah, or you get something like Alfred Hitchcock, who remade one of his own films.
Yeah.
He remade The Man Who Knew Too Much.
Yeah.
Recast it with Jimmy Stewart, made it 20 years later, I think.
But Total Recall breaks...
That seems worthwhile.
Yeah, Total Recall breaks new ground in that it actually sort of undermines itself at every turn in a way that it makes you wonder... It would have been better as another film altogether. Bizarrely, it's not that the film doesn't, on some level, ask the same questions as the Philip Dick source text, and which, in a sense, were asked by the Verhoeven original, but which were then just, had holes shot in them by automatic weaponry for 2 hours. It's a film that sort of asks the questions and then starts running away before it's had any kind of answer, because it's on its way to the next pointless chase sequence, and it is just a string of pointless chase sequences. And by 20 minutes into
and
this...
the magic teleporting women.
Yeah, the magic teleporting women, and by 20 minutes into this film you can almost see the cast like looking at each other sort of in between lines of dialogue and like, remind me what point in the story are we at here?
Yeah, well, clearly the actors involved had no idea either, because if you've ever seen it, just get in front of films that annoying from the red carpet thing.
Oh yeah, Colin Farrell.
But yeah, there's one with Colin Farrell, and they ask him, so what's Total Recall about? And he's clearly no idea.
No.
He's fumbling for an answer.
Well, you see, it looks quite pretty.
Yeah.
There's parts of it that we've ripped quite clearly from Blade Runner. That looks quite good. So that's all right. That is.
Funnily enough, yeah, there were parts of it where the sort of city design and stuff were so blatantly, you might as well have just copied and pasted frames from Blade Runner. You're absolutely right. I made that comment to my wife. It's that thing of, I think it kind of thinks it has a point, and it thinks if we throw enough at the screen, or if we sort of run along at breathless enough a pace, people won't stop to ask any questions. But people are stopping asking questions, and everyone that I've known who's seen it, including my wife when we were watching it, has asked, why was his wife trying to kill them again? They've rolled...
Yeah, none of it makes any sense.
Yeah, they've rolled the Richter and Sharon Stone characters into one for no good purpose here. And so throughout, his wife is, or the woman who's been posing as his wife is trying to kill him despite being ordered not to. And there's actually no explanation of why she's that hell-bent on doing it. That she's stubborn is the only answer I can ask. She decided at one point she would try and kill him, and now she's decided she'll finish the job, even though she's been expressly told not to by her superiors, and will probably get in a shitload of trouble if she does. Bizarre stuff. Like you guys mentioned, bizarre nods to the original that are completely out of place.
They make no sense when they're added in.
Make no sense at all. And in one case...
Well, especially with the theme of the rest of the film, of course.
And in one case, a particularly gratuitous one that there was just no need for, the sort of the three-breasted hooker woman who pops up just to make a joke. And whom I thought the shot...
That made sense on Mars because she was a mutant.
Yeah, and I thought who would just be a case of, like, it would be the crop from the trailer where we don't actually see what's below, and it's just going to be a little nudge, nudge, wink, wink. If you've seen the original, you'll know what he's looking at right now. But then we get sort of a wide shot of the woman standing there with her breasts out, and I'm thinking, in a film aimed at this market, was that necessary? And why have they been allowed to get away with that? This bizarre lack of consequence to the violence portrayed.
Consequence to the violence.
Yeah.
And also it's got, you're saying they rolled the Richter, the Michael Michael Ironside and Sharon Stone character into one. They've also just then stuck it in a photocopier and then given her a different name and made the heroine and the villain woman the same thing, more or less, because all through the film it's impossible to tell which one's which.
Yeah, I was very puzzled by that all the way throughout. I couldn't quite work out. I got to the point I couldn't quite work out who I was supposed to be rooting for, which is a critical failing of any film.
Yeah.
It's like, who are you?
I found myself rooting for Bryan Cranston just because I liked him in Drive. That was as good justification as good. And can someone please explain to me the scene which is replicated almost wholesale from the first film, in which a supposed friend of Quaid's approaches him and explains that, no, this is a dream I've been inserted here to get you out, but as a show of faith you have to perform this act. Can someone explain to me why it was Jessica Biel's character crying that persuaded him to shoot the man in the head?
No, I don't understand. That whole scene made no sense. No. Because I think I said in our podcast at the time, when that's an original film, it makes sense that the way that scene's done. And this one was like, well, it was in the original, we'll do it in this one, and none of it made any sense. You don't care about any of the characters.
Why did you shoot that man in the head, Colin? Because the poor girl started crying. She was that upset. Yeah, because you were going to shoot her in the head, not because it was any kind of...
Yeah,
she was facing the prospect of dying. That's no indication of the truth of your situation. It's bizarre, really bizarre. It's just whitewashed over these things. It's like no one actually stopped to ask any questions of the script at any point. I've actually got no idea how it got made, how it got past, the script got past any kind of quality control department.
Well, I assume they bypassed it completely.
Well, but the thing is, it's such a bizarre gamble to take on a film that they clearly spent. I mean, it must have had a budget of like 50, 60 million or something. I mean, there are bits where the film looks all right. Yeah, it's had money chucked at it, but for a studio to take that much of a gamble on a film that clearly no one's bothered to actually read beyond page 1 of the script.
Especially when like so little of it makes any sense. It's got like the magical clouds of poisonous gas which just seem to hang about outside London because they've been told to.
It seems very much one of these films. I mean, I'm no fan of this film, but I sat there watching it and I just sort of turned my brain off and just accepted, okay, fine, this is a thing that's happening to me now. On that basis, okay, it's not the worst film I have seen this year. It is completely pointless, and it has no real merit outside of... I mean, there's no need to remake it. You could make pretty much exactly the same film and not call it Total Recall.
Yeah,
and it would be as forgettable as this current one is, and I think it would have done as well commercially.
That's what I was saying at the start. It was like almost you might as well not have bothered to make it Total Recall. Just make it something else.
I mean, if you'd call this, I might even made the same point when I was talking about the review. If you'd call this, generic sci-fi film 7 and given it exactly the same plot, I would have watched it and went, well, this isn't very good, but it's not particularly bad, but, whatever.
Yeah. And if they shot it on half the budget,
3 out of 5.
If they shot it on half the budget, which they probably could have done, they might have made some money back on it.
Do you know what the budget was?
Oh, Jesus.
Ridiculous.
$125 million.
What?
Yep. And also, I've just found out that it gets even stupider because for some reason, despite the fact the whole point of making Quaid lose his memory was so that people who knew him already would trust him, wouldn't think he was a mole. Apparently in the extended director's cut, he originally was Ethan Hawke and he changed his physical appearance as well.
Okay. I'm not watching that.
This film gets stupider, which is impressive, actually.
I'm just intrigued by the notion that there's a director's cut, which, unless it's one of those studio hack jobs, lays bare the suggestion that Len Wiseman actually paid any attention when he was in the editing room.
I mean, in terms of remakes, you've got things like The Amazing Spider-Man, which isn't quite a remake, but it's a reboot of the Spider-Man franchise and another origin story. And that was okay, perfectly fine. It would bother my top 20 lists of the year. It's pretty decent. Quite why they decided to make and it's got to be a conscious decision to make such an arse of Total Recall. There's no way. I mean, if you just basically shot the same film again, it would be much better.
Yeah.
I mean, basically just do everything that Paul Verhoeven does, but with better effects, and people would really love this film, sure.
Yeah.
Because people really love the old film, and if you could just do it but a bit better, people would have flocked to it. But no, it decided to mess about with it in ways that really don't make any sense, and it's just puzzling. I don't get why they've done it. It is probably, and I will say this again, by no means the worst film that could possibly be entertained in 2012. I'm sure there is some, no-budget horror film that is much, much worse than this. But in terms of things that were presented as something that a mass market might like, I'm completely puzzled by the existence of Total Recall 2012.
Yeah, and well, in terms of just setting fire to $125 million. No film has quite managed it like this in recent memory. So I am flabbergasted that was the budget, that anyone would hand Len Wiseman that kind of money. I mean, I know The Last Die Hard was at least vaguely entertaining, but I don't think even that came in at that budget, did it?
That was made 5 years earlier than Total Recall for $50 million less.
It wasn't 5 years ago.
It was.
Get out of town. Oh my goodness.
June 2007.
You're so old.
5 years earlier for $50 million less.
Yep. And at least some entertainment value.
Seemed to have an awful lot more in it.
Yeah.
That exploded.
Yeah. Oh, man alive.
I mean, they had a huge sequence where a fighter jet follows a truck that went on forever, and it still managed to make that for less money than Total Recall.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there you go. What else did we have to rant at? Because I feel like we spent enough time on Total Recall and I need to go to bed soon.
I'm not sure that anything rant is perhaps a disappointment in Rust and Bone, in that it had such great performances just to absolutely no end whatsoever.
That's true.
Okay, actually no, there is one film I want to shout at. I'd forgotten about it till now. Spectacularly stupid, had no point, terrible film. Killing Them Softly.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Terrible film.
Yeah, a film that has a very deep sense of self-importance that it does not back up with any kind of actual...
Yes, that it very much does not deserve.
Yes.
Nice. Well, there you go then. I guess that's as good a roundup of 2012 as we can expect. So if you had to pick one film as your favourite of the year, Drew?
I genuinely don't think I could, because then how do you pick something as fun as The Muppets over something as emotional as The Impossible or something like that? I couldn't, and I wouldn't want to.
Scott, any overall preference?
The answer is, of course, you pick the film that has someone getting dissolved by an incendiary round, and you pick Dread.
Nice. If only that were an option every year. Someone gets dissolved by an incendiary round. Is that The Impossible? If only Life of Pi featured incendiary rounds. I've got a solution to your tiger problem, buddy. Ah, dear. No clear standout for me, because there were a few particularly good films, but none that I think really that I witnessed with my own two eyes in a cinema that I would say were clear sort of standouts. I don't think overall it's been as strong a year as 2011, I want to say, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
You know what? In general, I would probably agree with you until I sort of sat down in front of a top 10 list and thought, well, actually, all of these films are pretty damn good. Like every year, you take the rough with the smooth, and I think there's a lot of smooth films that we could recommend this year, so take that for what you will.
Indeed. So, well, thank you for putting up with us for, I guess by this point, the best part of 2 hours. So yeah, thank you very much for that. Following this podcast, our first proper review of new films in 2013 should be following along quite promptly, so keep checking your feed. Please remember also, if you get a chance, take 10 seconds and rate us on iTunes. It's a massive help if you do. All that remains is for me to say, I was Craig, Scott was Scott.
Good night.
And Drew was Drew.
Goodbye.
We are out of here like last year. Bye. Let me just toss a coin that isn't a coin here.